So our final speaker for this session will be Pascal Gerber. Pascal, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let me just share my screen. Can you see my slides now?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Welcome to my presentation, First Person Singular Indexation in Mewahang. In this talk, I will first give an introduction on the Merohang language and then give a first account on its agreement morphology in general. And then I will, in the main part, I will focus on first person singular marking in this language. So Mewahang is a Trans-Himalayan language spoken in the Sangkwa and Arun river valleys of eastern Nepal in Sangkwa Sabha district. Within Trans-Himalayan or Sino-Tibetan, it belongs to the Kiranti group of languages. The language has at most 900 speakers, but since child transmission is largely disrupted, it must be considered to be endangered, and it has so far not been described. And in the context of my PhD thesis, A Historical Grammar of Mewahang, I have been conducting field work since 2017 on the language in the villages Bala, Mangteba, and Yamdang, and also in the capital of Nepal in Kathmandu. With a strong focus on the Western dialect. So in the following, when I say Mewahang, and specifically, I always mean Western Mewahang. So my focus in this talk will also be on this dialect. Phylogenetically, Mewahang, together with Lohorung and Yampu, constitutes the Upper Arun subgroup of Kiranti. There are two dialects of Mewahang. There is a Western dialect spoken in the Sangkwa Valley here. Nowadays, this dialect is only spoken in the Bala village. In Yamdang and Tamku, it is extinct. And then there is an Eastern dialect spoken in the Arun Valley in the villages Mangteba, Yafu, and Choyeng here. Here you can also see the sister languages of Merohang, Lohorung here in the east and Yampu in the north. So, like all Kiranti languages, Merohang shows biactential argument indexation or agreement morphology on the verb. So both the agent and the patient in a transitive verb may be marked morphologically. The categories differentiated in the Merohang agreement morphology are 3 persons, first, second, third, 3 numbers, singular, dual, plural, and there is also occlusivity distinction. The tense aspect markers of Merohang as well as auxiliaries come between the verb stem and the agreement endings, so they precede the agreement endings. Negation is marked with a prefix ma in past and authoritative, and with a suffix na in non-past tense and imperative mood. Here you can see the intransitive paradigm of Merohang. Here, this paradigm is abstracted from any specific tense or polarity value, so it's just the person endings, the agreement endings. And you can see that first person singular has quite a lot of different markers. So this will be the main topic of my talk today. And then here you can see the other endings for first plural, inclusive, exclusive, second person, and third person. And as you can see, for the dual number, there is no person specification. So for any person, first, second, and third, the dual marker will just be Z. Right, now here you can see the transitive paradigm of Western Merohang. Here you have the agent, and here you have the patient, and then here you have the specific forms. And the patient is here marked with blue color and the agent with green color. So you can already see that not all configurations in the transitive paradigm are actually biactentially marked. Some are only marked for the patient and some are only marked for the agent. With regard to the morphology of the transitive paradigm, the morphemes used are mainly the same as in the intransitive paradigm, except for the dedicated transitive morphemes U, third patient, which you can see all over the place here, and C, third person non-singular, which you can see, for example, here, and M, which is the marker for first and second plural agent, which you can see here, and here, num. So in this talk, I will focus on first person singular indexation from now on, and namely, I will talk about 3 peculiarities with regard to first-person singular indexation. And by peculiarities, I mean formal and structural traits which are synchronically unexplicable or unexpected or irregular or noteworthy. So as I said, there are three peculiarities to be discussed. First, the distribution of the allomorphs ang, nga, nge, then the non-past marking of first-person singular, and finally the existence of a separate set of oral suffixes ak and uk. And I will discuss those in turns. So as we have seen in the table with for the intransitive paradigm, there are 4 different markers for first-person singular, and the 3 will be discussed now, and the 4th will be discussed a bit later. So the 3 allomorphs or markers ang, nga, nge, they stand in a distribution which is partially non-transparent and synchronically non-functional. I will illustrate this now. The first allomorph ang is used for S and P roles. That means the S is the single argument of an intransitive verb, and P is the patient-like or non-agent argument of a transitive verb. So for these 2 roles in non-past affirmative tense in polarity values. So here are some examples. Gung ang, I'm going down. Da ang, I will come. And then to illustrate the P role, egu ang, he is chasing me away. And then aktsi, the 2 of them are asking me. The second allomorph nga is used for the same roles as in P in non-past negative forms and in imperatives with a first-person object. So here we have tsangana, I'm not eating, and tapnganam, I will not come. So this illustrates the non-past negative. And then here we have 2 imperative forms, biknaye, give it to me, and longanaye, don't hit me. Now the third allomorph nge is somewhat different from the first 2 because it is transparently distributed. Namely, it is a phonologically conditioned post-vocalic allomorph of first-person singular. Consequently, it appears first in first-person singular on third forms, so where it would follow the third-person marker u, and also for S and P roles in past tense, where it would immediately follow the past marker a. So we have examples here again. Beyukung, I'm scolding her. Makok ditung, I have not yet cut it. Kuksang, I went down. And tsa shetang, I have finished eating. So as we can see, the allomorphs ang and nga have no real functional synchronic distribution. We can say that we can see from distribution that everywhere where we would not expect this clearly conditioned allomorph nge, so in post-vocalic position, we seem to get nga as the first person singular index, except for non-past affirmative where we get ang. So nga could be defined as a kind of default or unmarked marker or unspecified or elsewhere marker. So the main question to be answered is what caused the allomorph ang here for non-past affirmative? Because there is no morphological or phonological conditioning or reason why this should be ang in this configuration here. To clarify this, it is useful to look at the other Upper Arun languages to have some external comparison. But because the explanation to this peculiarity is related to the explanation for the second peculiarity to be discussed, I will first discuss this and then give a unified explanation for both peculiarities. So the second peculiarity concerns non-past marking of first person singular. In Western Merohang, the non-past marker has 3 allomorphs which are conditioned by the verb stem coda. So we have a first allomorph ge, which appears with verbs ending in a vowel, in nasals, in s, in 2 verbs with simple t, and in verbs with geminated t with a short stem vowel. The second allomorph uk is used after verbs ending in non-dental stops, both simple b and g, and phonologically complex pt and kt. Final allomorph yuk appears after verbs ending in t, and in verbs ending in double th with a long stem vowel. And because these allomorphs look quite similar, and because they are complementary distributed, we can internally reconstruct yuk as the non-past marker for pre-Western Merohang. And uk and ge are therefore somewhat reduced allomorphs. So here are some examples. Bakika, we are dancing, where the non-past allomorph ge is added to a stem ending in s. Kekika, we are going, where the verb ket takes non-past marker ge. It is one of only two verbs in the which take this allomorph of the non-past marker. And then we have hibukukbe, I'm wetting it. And finally, deyukpa, do you get it? Literally, this means, is it visible? So for first person singular S and P role marker ang, the non-past allomorphs show the unexpected form with a final glottal stop. So we have u, u, and instead of allomorphs with a final velar stop. Here are two examples. Ke ang, I am going, and togu akbu, I will take a rest. And these glottal allomorphs are not only unexpected, but they are in fact irregular, because there is no evidence whatsoever in the phonology of Mewahang for pre-vocalic glottalization of g. And in fact, if we look at first person singular on third person forms, where the non-past marker is immediately followed by the vocalic suffix u for third person patient, there we get the non-past allomorphs with final g. So we have kanggung, I'm looking at it, and yamdabukung, I will bring her. So here there is no glottalization of the g. So what happened in the SP with the SP index for first person singular? Now there is an internal clue to the explanation, which is that before nasal agreement suffixes in Western Merohang, the non-past marker is regularly realized with a final glottal stop or a glottalized velar stop. So here are two examples. Tsa naba, will you eat? And miuk namha, are you cooking? So here you can see that the non-past markers are realized with a glottal stop instead of the velar stop, because they are immediately followed by a nasal suffix. And the glottalization of g in syllable final position is actually quite a regular process in Mewahang. So this raises the suspicion that the first person singular marker may have originally also been nasal initial. And this is, if you remember the shows that I formed before, that I showed before, supported by the fact that the non-past negative and imperative allomorphs for first person singular are in fact nga with an initial velar nasal. So to test this hypothesis, we will now look at external data from the other Upper Arun languages. So here you can see the non-past affirmative, non-past negative, and past affirmative forms of Western Merohang compared to those of Eastern Merohang, Lohorung, and Yampu, the other Upper Arun languages. For Eastern Merohang, I have to shortly say that there are two dialects, the Mangtewa dialect and the Yafu dialect, which somewhat diverge from each other with regard to first-person singular indexation. So I have listed both forms whenever they are different. So the first thing to look at is the non-past negative paradigm. Here we can see that all Upper Arun languages show the first-person singular index nga followed by the negative suffix, which is ni in all other Upper Arun languages, na in Western Merohang. So there is no tense marker in all Upper Arun languages. So we can say that here we have the, we have something like a pure first-person singular marker. So a marker which is not influenced or fused with any other morphological category like tense or something else. So we can say that the form that we get here, nga, may be the unmarked or pure first-person singular index in Upper Arun. Now in affirmative non-past here in the first row, we get a tense marker in all Upper Arun languages, and actually all of them except for Yampu are in fact cognate, but that's not to be discussed here any further. what we can see in Yafu Merohang is that there is a portmanteau morpheme for first person singular non-past. So there are no transparent morpheme boundaries anymore. The non-past marker and the first person singular marker have completely fused together. Nah. So this must be ignored for the moment. In Mangtewa Merohang, we see that we have the same form as in Western Merohang, but in Lohorung and Yampu, we have the same first person singular index as in the non-past negative. And so we can say that in Proto-Upper Arun, for the non-past affirmative, we also originally had nga, as is still reflected in Lohorung and Yampu, which I consider to be more conservative here in this area. So we can define Western Merohang and Eastern Merohang ang as innovative. And then finally, the past tense row. Here we can see in all Upper Arun languages that the first person singular index was phonologically fused with a vocalic past marker a. As you can see in Yampu, Lohorung, and Yafu Merohang, we have a different vowel quality, but I suggest that this is actually secondary. So these languages originally also had ang, and this ing here came about by analogy to other forms in the Lohorung and Yampu paradigms. So we can assume, because it occurs all over Upper Arun, that this is actually reconstructible to Proto-Upper Arun. And in fact, this tensed person index for first person singular past, ang, is something that is attested beyond Upper Arun in other Kiranti languages and has been identified by Van Riem as a common or pan-Kiranti trait. So this certainly predates Upper Arun. So from this comparison, we can conclude that nga was the original unmarked first person singular index in Upper Arun, and we can reconstruct two forms to Proto-Upper Arun, nga, which is just a plain first person singular index, and ang, which is a tensed, namely past morpheme for first person singular. So now, what actually conditioned these forms here in West Merohang and East Merohang? That was the question before, and that's still the question to be answered here. I propose that what happened here is analogical leveling. So I think that in Western and Eastern Mangtewa Merohang, the inherited formal difference in first person singular marking between nga, which we had originally in non-past affirmative, still reflected in Lohorung and Yampu, and ang in past was analogically leveled in favor of a uniform ang with the velar nasal in the coda. And this explanation does not only account for the shape of the allomorph for first person singular in these two dialects and for the somewhat funny distribution of the first person singular indexes in Western Merohang, but it also explains why we have a glottal stop in the non-past here in Western Merohang. Because this glottal stop is just a reflection of the earlier form, yuk nga, which is still attested here nicely in Lohorung. So in summary, I would like to give a short overview of the development of first person singular indexation from pre-Upper Arun until Western Merohang. Pre-Upper Arun is here defined as some linguistic stage somewhere between Proto-Trans-Himalayan and, let's say, 5 minutes before Proto-Upper Arun happened. So it may be Proto-Trans-Himalayan, Proto-Kiranti, or some intermediary stage. But whatever it was, in this stage, first person singular was indexed completely regularly by nga in all possible configurations. And then somewhere between this pre-Upper Arun and Proto-Upper Arun, the past form nga was fused to ang, and this transitive form u nga was also fused and reduced to ung. And then in the last stage from Proto-Upper Arun to Mangtewa and Western Merohang, the non-past ending for first person singular nga, in analogy to the past form here, was leveled to become ang as well. So you can see this accounts nicely for this synchronic distribution of the first person singular indexes that we can see here again for Western Merohang, and it also accounts for why there is a glottal stop here and not a velar stop, because that was what would be expected from this earlier form, and this just didn't get modified to the new environment. So now I would like to briefly discuss the last and third peculiarity in first-person singular indexation in the Mewahang language, which concerns the fact that there are actually two sets of markers for first-person singular with a consonantal coda. There are the nasal endings that we have already seen, ang and and there is a separate set of oral endings, ak, uk. Here are some examples. Shek, shike, ak, I am going to do the dishes. Sapak, I had enough. Kima, hukuk, I can carry it. And seduk, I killed it. Functionally, the difference between the nasal and oral forms is not yet fully understood. They do not seem to be conditioned by grammatical factors like tense, aspect, the semantics of the verb, or certain auxiliaries, because both sets would appear with all the different categories. They do also not seem to be conditioned by social linguistic parameters, because, like age or sex, because both sets are used equally by both sexes and speakers of all age. Additionally, different speakers repeatedly used both forms in the same context, and when I asked them, they were actually unable to detect any difference between the two sets. So at the moment, my assumption is that there is a pragmatic or maybe a slight aspectual distinction. And if we look at external data to find maybe cognates or an explanation for these for this oral set, we see that neither in any Upper Arun language nor in any other Kiranti language do we find any such first-person singular markers with an oral velar coda. And likewise, the general Trans-Himalayan evidence suggests that the form with a velar nasal is in fact the one to be assumed for first-person singular. So there is actually no evidence whatsoever, comparative evidence for oral velar endings for first-person singular. So this obviously constitutes a Merohang-specific secondary development. Additionally, if we zoom in into Merohang, there is no evidence for a similar alternation between nasal and oral forms with other person endings like second person na or third person plural me, or in fact with the other first person allomorph nga. So the alternation concerns the specific phonology of the ending with a final velar nasal, and not the coherent morphological category of first person singular. And any explanation must therefore also pertain to the phonology of this ending and not to the morphological category of first person singular. So my suggestion here is that the oral suffixes derive from earlier angbu, which is the first person singular marker combined with the nominalizer bu. My arguments for this are that the nominalizers bu and m in Merohang appear on a majority of finite verb forms with a primarily pragmatic discourse-oriented function, as they do in other Kiranti and actually in many other Trans-Himalayan languages. Additionally, syllable final nasals in Merohang are oralized or denasalized before voiceless obstruents. This is actually diagnostic innovation of Merohang, which separates it from its closest relatives, Lohorung and Yampu, so that angbu is regularly realized as akbu. So I suppose that by means of analogical back formation, ak or uk may have been isolated as an independent morpheme, separate from both the construction akbu, from which it originated, and the primary first-person singular index ang or So now I have already reached the summary of my talk. Western Merohang shows a number of structural and formal peculiarities with regard to first-person singular indexation, which are synchronically obscure, but which can be explained diachronically quite nicely, I think. Here I'm showing again the three peculiarities and the explanation that I have proposed in this talk. And I can state as a concluding remark that the domain of first-person singular indexation is an area of various innovations in both Merohang and Upper Arun in general. because there were other innovations like the change from ang to ing in Yampu and Lohorung, and the portmanteau morpheme nga'a in Yafu Mewahang, etc., etc. And its historical comparative investigation is therefore a very fruitful work to do research on. So here you can see my data sources for the Upper Aran languages, and here are some references.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Pascal.
Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, we've run a bit into the questions time, so let's get directly to questions and comments.
If nobody else is saying something, I might say something. You might take a look at Mewahang, because in the beginning you said you're going to explain this K that shows up, but you actually seems to have not talked about that one. But you might take a look at Mewahang, because in Mewahang you do get, in verbs have generally lost a historical final K and become a glottal stop. But when it's first person, the K returns. In other words, you can identify a verb as first person just from the fact that it's a K rather than a glottal stop. And I just always assumed that there must have been a first person, because the first person marker is and I assume that maybe there was one there, and it just, because of assimilation, the glottal stop just gets, fully voiced or something, as a K, fully expressed as a K. But there's also, you can get, in Mewahang, you can get up to 5 iterations of the first person marker in a single verb phrase. And so I wonder if something like that might also have been involved historically in this language. So you can even get, what's a weird thing about it from it kind of goes against our normal ways of thinking about language, is the affix, which is normally a suffix. This is usually a suffix on the verb. But if in some contexts, like say you have a verb like yuk, if you have yuk, which is like to scoop some or pour some water for me or something, pour some water, and if you add, like, say, the benefactive suffix the glottal stop becomes a K, and then the suffix becomes actually the initial of a syllable, which is formed just by the suffix of the original. It should have been the suffix, becomes the initial of a syllable, which involves just the benefactive morpheme and another copy of the first person marker. So you get, like, instead of yung or something like that, you get yuknam. And so that's a kind of weird thing. And you can get a number of iterations. And this, if your language had that something like that initially, and then some of them kind of dropped off in different contexts, then that would lead to some of these things as well. I don't know if I'm clear, but anyway.
Thank you for these remarks. Quite interesting remarks, probably worth looking into it. I also realized, or I also observed that first person singular marking is also in Kiranti in general, but also in Merohang specifically, is also somewhat special or strange in other respects, because, for example, there is with verbs which end in a vowel A, like to eat, za, if you have the third person patient marker u with certain forms where it immediately follows the verb stem, this would phonologically fuse to o, so you would get so. But for first person singular, where you have actually the ending so you would expect something like zong, it is in fact zang. So something, I think there's a lot going on with first person singular.
That happens in something like that happens in Mewahang as well, where, so like like an eval becomes when you add the suffix. So that's a pretty regular. There are certain regular phonetic things that happen, or phonological things that happen with the addition of these markers. And in a 2010 paper, on the hierarchical marking in Merohang, I also talk about how the whole system is really based around first person. It's really first person. It's not really first person. You know, it's not like the standard 1, 2, 3 type of hierarchy. It's really first person is the one who matters, and the other people just don't really matter as much as first person. It's first person. It's essentially marked. Second person and third person are only marked in terms of number, but not in terms of person. So it's very much a first person heavy kind of system.
Okay. Thank you.